Seeing that Elden Ring, which is basically Dark Souls 4 now open world, was gonna come out this year and it came out, I thought to myself, hey, this would be a good time to make a video about accessibility because, of course, when the game gets released, there will be some comments and discussions and constant drivel on the internet about difficulty, which is gonna lump accessibility in there as well and make everything seem utterly depressing. There'll be one side who, according to the other side, is saying that games should be so easy to play that you can even just stare at them with your eyes closed and bam, you win. And the other side will say that the other side thinks that the game should cut off your hand as part of the installation process, otherwise it's not a real game. But as I look around, I don't see that. Elden Ring seems to have been a game that is, for the most part, accessible. I mean, they even put bonfires before boss battles, so that's something. But still, accessibility is an important thing that we must be aware of. Now, some of you may be saying to yourself, well, I don't need accessibility, I'm perfectly capable of playing video games to their fullest and always will be, forever. The rapid onslaught of time will not dwell my abilities, and misfortune will not visit me and make me a shell of my former self. I am immortal. I am indestructible. Well, you're not. Sorry to break it to you, you're not. You're going to be 80 years old at some point in the future if we all survive the... well, let's not talk about that. And you will want to play the games from your youth, only to find that you don't have that ability anymore. And not just because every game is now unplayable because nobody bought games from GOG and now GOG is gone and all the DRM servers are gone for all the old games that you used to like. And piracy is illegal because of that chip, the RAAA, stuck in your head that will blow up your face if you even think about cracking an executable. No, you'll have trouble playing those games because, well, you don't have that dexterity anymore, that ability to see properly, that ability to act quickly enough, that ability to move enough of your fingers. And the thing is, that's only something that will actually affect games released from one period of time going forward, because back in the olden days, the vast majority of computer games were turn-based. That's how things worked. You couldn't really do much real-time since, well, the processing power and things that were real-time really behaved a lot like they were turn-based anyway. Think back to the oldest, not oldest, some of the earlier flight simulators that used to run at maybe 10 frames a second. That was basically turn-based, honestly, at this point. Most games released up until the 3D revolution, I guess, could be playable with a single method of input, either through a keyboard or through just a mouse, or some of them with just a joystick. With very limited input, you could do a lot. Just think about Fallout 1 and 2. You could play them with just a mouse. You could enjoy them with very little actual problems, with very limited ability of motion, of movement. Same goes for most PC games from back then. Civilization, Heroes of Might and Magic, most of the Ultimates. Hell, because of the speed setting, even games like StarCraft or Warcraft or Command & Conquer. Speed actually is one of the most important factors when it comes to accessibility. Exactly how quickly I can react to the game without it becoming increasingly more stressful, more challenging to the point where it's not enjoyable anymore. It is just a chore, one that I cannot achieve. I'm not saying games should be slower. I'm saying that where there's the possibility of adding a speed setting, one would not hurt. And I say this knowingly that it would not hurt. One game that I just recently covered has such a speed setting. They call it a reflex setting, Daggerfall. When you begin the game, it flat out asks you, how quickly do you want to play? On the lowest setting, you have time. You can decide exactly how quickly you want combat to function, allowing you, if you have more limited movement or limited reaction times, to actually be able to enjoy a game. It even goes into the opposite direction, actually. Speeding up games can also make them more enjoyable, more accessible, because who the hell has hours and hours and hours to play a city builder or a tycoon? The speed setting is there to accelerate time and more quickly show you the results of your actions, which is why it was monumentally stupid that the maximum speed setting was disabled for SimCity if you try to play it offline. Remember that debacle? That absolute wank fest? Because I do. Probably gonna make a video just about that thing at some point. And this thing with the speed setting, it's not just for, older games like, StarCraft 1 or Daggerfall. One of my favorite games of the past couple of years, Synthetic, doesn't have a speed setting, but it has a speed sheet. I don't remember exactly the pre-requirements to unlocking it, but you can make it run at 50% speed, which granted makes the game easier, probably not the way that it was intended to be played, at full tilt, but it makes it more relaxing, and honestly it does not detract all that much from the intensity. While yes, you can more carefully aim now that you have more time and better plan out your movements, you're still dealing with the same time frame in terms of what you can do. You can't move faster. The enemy's bullets will not hurt less. Those things that run after you and explode will still run after you and explode, and you can't outrun them. Haven't seen them in the sequel yet, hope they're not there. It is simply amazing how much a simple speed setting can alter how a game can be enjoyed. And the beauty of it is that if you don't like it, you can just set it to run at 100% and that's it, and nothing will be affected. Now there is a danger that some developers will make the game with a different speed setting in mind than the one that is labeled as being normal. There would be the issue of that cropping up, but to a far lesser extent than shoving microtransactions even into single-player games in order to absolutely ruin the progression so that players will be driven towards the microtransactions, because you don't get extra money from a speed setting. You maybe get extra money because more people will buy it that would normally not be able to play it and therefore would not buy it. And honestly, that would be a bit of an easier thing to implement than a different difficulty settings, which would require you to, play test, maybe see if the health or the damage of the enemies is properly scaled or stuff like that. So to be honest, this is more of a console thing. A lot of accessibility issues arise from the console side. It's why Microsoft developed its own controller specifically for people with certain disabilities. It's something that I hope every company embraces, the idea of making hardware which allows everybody to play to the best of their abilities. But on the PC, since it's not a lockdown platform, or isn't for the time being, that exploder chip in your brain is probably gonna come from some company at some point. You have alternatives. You have stuff like eye tracking or hand tracking, gesture tracking, facial animation tracking, which can conceivably be used as methods of input for a game. Now, quite often, I mean pretty much every time, these aren't built into the games, but they can be added to the games by people who actually want them in the game. The ability to play a game, well, maybe not every game, I don't think you'll be playing competitive Street Fighter with just your eyes, but the ability to play a video game without a standard control method can be a life-changing experience, and I speak that from my own experience. Back when I was mostly dead, I had the misfortune of, apart from other misfortunes, the only source of levity, if you will, to take my own mind off the death, was my 3.5-inch phone with a touchscreen. And let me tell you, a touchscreen is an absolutely garbage input method when you have basically no motor control and can barely move your eyes, let alone your hands. Thought to myself, hey, I'm gonna play one of those hidden object games. Those are easy. I mean, they all have time limits now, unless you pay for the extension or the full version. Yeah, that tracks. I'll try Angry Birds, so I can't properly line up the shots because I can't move my fingers that way anymore. I gave up on the idea quite quickly. Maybe playing a game or two would have made a positive change on my mental state, especially when the darkness gripped. But there was no such option because the touch screen is simply a horrible, terrible input method in general. But if I had had a screen with one of those eye tracking things attached to them that somebody would have set up, in auto hotkey or something, to make blinking with the left eye left click and blinking with the right eye right click, Well, honestly, that would have not have helped me much because I could not blink. I mean, individually, I could not blink my eyes or close them. I just had to sort of mush them together until I only saw a sliver of light from the neon that nobody would turn off, to the point where I had no idea if it was day or night. I'd been here for a week or a month, or if this is just hell. Anywho, I'm trying to say that having an accessible method of input for somebody who could mostly just live in their brain would have been really nice. Thankfully, I'm no longer in the same situation that Stephen Hawking was. Let me tell you, living like that for a short time was harrowing. Living that for an entire lifetime, that takes bravery and willpower. And it would be nice if those people, if anybody that wants to play a game has the ability to do so, both from an input standpoint where the game allows them to interface with it through any means that is at their disposal, and from an accessibility standpoint where no matter how limited their ability to interact with the game is, most games should have the option of them being playable with a more limited reaction speed or control scheme. Not all games. This isn't gonna be valid for anything that works in multiplayer, it can't. And it's not gonna be valid for Dance Dance Revolution either. That's not what the game is supposed to be. But for the majority of them, I don't think it'll be any kind of issue, especially if we're talking about console games. And I may ruffle some feathers here, but console games are not hard, especially if we're talking about action-adventure games or first-person shooters where you have auto-aiming to the point where your target snaps the head of the enemy. The auto-aiming that we used to have in video games, you know, as an assisted difficulty mode, which was toggleable, stuff like Unreal Tournament and other things, is active by default in most modern FPS games, and it's cranked up 100-fold. And action-adventure games, that's basically code for hide in some tall grass and hit the enemy from behind, and bam, that's your game. There's not really much you can ruin in quotation marks by making it playable with one hand or at a lower speed. It's still gonna suck as a game, sorry, but they suck. Recover shooting, hide in tall grass, wait for the enemy's glowing bits to be revealed and shoot them. They suck. Maybe when they did it once it was fun, but now they all do that. They all have combat that boils down to what Arkham Asylum did, which is smash button when prompt appears on screen and win. Honestly, you could do that by blinking your eyes with no issues, so I don't see why that's not a standard feature. I mean, hey, remember the Kinect? That thing that Microsoft shoved down our throats? Now granted, that wasn't actually powerful enough to do eye tracking, but if it did... Hey, remember the Sony iToy thing, the PlayStation VR camera thing? That could that do eye tracking or something? Because if it can, they kinda should. I mean, it would be useful. That's kind of the hurdle that we face now in terms of accessibility, of actually letting people play the games that they would be physically unable to actually play otherwise. Because in other terms of accessibility, in terms of setting color to something that would make more sense for how some people see color, we have that most times, mostly. We have subtitles even, with on occasion the ability to change font size and color. We still don't have subtitles for incidental chatter though, which is incredibly annoying, even as somebody that can hear, because I tend to play without sound since I have other stuff to listen to. But we have stuff like sign language in a racing game, which is honestly something I never expected to see in a game, let alone a racing one. I think we're on the right path at this moment to getting games to be more accessible, so they can be played by anybody. And I'm not even getting to methods by which people who don't have the ability to see can play video games. That requires a lot more work in terms of how the game is made, how the sound is designed, how feedback, feedback, the force feedback you have in your gamepads, controller stuff, most of it is garbage, it's useless, but the technology has always been there to allow people to actually feel where they are in a game. A good example of this was Need for Speed 5 with my Logitech gamepad, and the default profile it had loaded on that Logitech software thing. You could feel the difference between the types of roads you were on. You could feel the bumps in the road. Now, I'm not certain if something like that could enable somebody who can't see to play the game, but I think it would sure help. And in terms of sound, Abe's Odyssey was so well made in that aspect that a sightless person can play it and finish it. So with some effort, it is possible to make games accessible to everyone. We just have to care enough to try. And I'm glad that the release of Elden Ring did not cause any sort of stupid issues like that thing that happened with Cuphead, where a guy who's been doing tech journalism for close to 30 years fumbled horribly in a tutorial, got mocked for it on the internet, and instead of taking the L, as the kids would say, got spurred on by his publication to launch an absolute assault along with everybody else in the circle, if you want to call it, of games journalists that don't really like games but are here because of the hats or something, against the concept of video games having any sort of challenge or depth or meaning to them. It was just one big fat circus. But maybe we've grown beyond that at this point. Maybe we're at the dawn of a new age of understanding and civility, and realizing that Mad Clixio doesn't get the moolah as it used to because of the constant apocalypses, and maybe it's not worth creating a culture war out of nothing just to sell some ads. Only time will tell. Goodbye, everybody.